I was halfway through my wedding vows to Mason Hart when his father, Grant Hart, suddenly stood up and shouted for the ceremony to stop. In front of 200 guests, he accused me of being a gold digger and claimed he had proof I was manipulating his son for money. My hands trembled as everyone turned to stare at me. Then a private investigator I had never seen before walked into the chapel carrying a sealed envelope. Grant's confidence vanished for a split second. I didn't understand why. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. One moment, I was looking at the man I loved, ready to spend my life with him. The next, the chapel was filled with the sound of gasps and whispers. I scanned the room, looking for Mason, but he looked just as confused as I was. The investigator, a tall man in a gray suit, didn't say a word. He just stood there, the envelope clutched in his hand like a weapon. The air grew heavy, thick with tension and judgment. I wondered what was inside that paper and why it made a man as powerful as Grant look like he had seen a ghost. The ceremony dissolved into chaos. Guests whispered. My mother cried. Mason tried to calm everyone while Grant continued attacking my character, calling me names that made my skin crawl. The wedding planner hurried over, her face pale, trying to usher people toward the exits. Before leaving, the private investigator quietly told me, "You deserve to know the truth." Then he walked away, disappearing into the sea of confused faces. I realized this nightmare was bigger than a ruined wedding. I looked at Mason, who was currently arguing with his father, his face red with frustration and anger. I felt a cold chill run down my spine. The way the investigator looked at me, it wasn't with pity, but with a strange kind of recognition. I felt the weight of all those eyes on me, judging me for something I hadn't done. My dreams of a beautiful day were shredded. I stood there in my white dress, feeling entirely exposed and powerless. The chapel felt like a cage, and I just wanted to run away from all of it. I had no idea that my life was already falling apart at the seams. After the ceremony was postponed, I learned the investigator was hired months ago by someone connected to Grant. Even stranger, the envelope was meant specifically for him. Yet Grant refused to open it in public. Why would a man so confident suddenly look terrified? I spent the rest of the night pacing my bedroom, clutching my phone. Who would hire someone to investigate their own son's wedding? And why would they want Grant to have that specific information right at the altar? I couldn't stop thinking about the investigator's face. He had a look of cold determination. It wasn't just a random act, it was a carefully planned strike. I began to realize that my relationship had been under a microscope for months, without me ever knowing it. I felt violated. If someone had been watching me, what else did they know? I looked at my reflection, seeing a bride who had been turned into a target. The mystery of the envelope began to consume me, overshadowing the pain of the ruined wedding. I needed to know what could make a giant like Grant Hart tremble in front of his entire social circle. That night, Mason admitted this isn't the first wedding Grant has interfered with. Years ago, Grant sabotaged his older brother's engagement. The bride disappeared from the family entirely. Grant always claimed he was protecting his sons. Suddenly, I wondered how many lives he'd manipulated. Mason sat on the edge of the bed, his head buried in his hands. He explained how his father had used lies and money to ensure that his sons only married suitable women. It was a pattern of control that spanned decades. I felt nauseous as I listened. I had thought we were special, that our love was enough to survive his father's disapproval. I was wrong. I was just the latest victim in a long line of women deemed unworthy. The thought that Mason had known about this and kept it from me created a new, sharper ache in my chest. He said he thought his father had changed, that he was different from me. His naivety was almost as painful as the betrayal. I realized I didn't just have to fight Grant, I had to fight the family legacy itself. The path ahead looked impossible. I tracked down Mason's brother's former fiancée, Cassidy Vaughn. She revealed Grant spread lies about her until the engagement collapsed. She told me how he had hired people to stalk her, dig through her trash, and intimidate her friends. Before ending the call, she warned me, Grant doesn't destroy relationships for no reason. He's hiding something. Her voice was still filled with the bitterness of what had happened all those years ago. She was a lawyer now, living in another city, but the scars were still clearly there. I sat in my kitchen, The phone pressed to my ear, listening to the echoes of her trauma. She confirmed everything Mason had said and more. Grant wasn't just a controlling father. He was a master of psychological warfare. I thanked her and hung up, feeling like I had just peered into an abyss. She was right. There was something at the core of Grant's actions that went beyond mere snobbery. He was protecting his own interests, and I was just the latest threat. The mystery of his motivation felt like a puzzle that was finally starting to show its jagged edges. The private investigator, Reed Mercer, contacted me directly. He refused to tell me what was inside the envelope, but confirmed one thing. His investigation uncovered something Grant never expected anyone to find. His voice was calm and steady, like someone who had delivered bad news 1,000 times. He told me to meet him at a public park, but I was too afraid to go. We spoke for 30 minutes, and I tried to pry for details, but he wouldn't budge. He said that once I knew the truth, there would be no turning back. He mentioned that he had been hired by a source that wanted to ensure justice was served, but he wouldn't reveal the name. I felt like a pawn in a game I didn't understand. I was terrified of what I might find, but the alternative, living in fear of Grant Hart, was worse. He told me to keep my eyes open and to trust no one. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of resolve. I had been dragged into this, but I wasn't going to be the one to back down now. Reed shared a clue that led me to a storage unit rented under a company tied to Grant. Inside were boxes of documents, photographs, and financial records. The unit was dark, smelling of dust and old paper. As I flipped through the files, my hands shaking, I saw bank statements, property deeds, and photos of people I didn't recognize. Before I could examine everything, someone broke in and stole half the contents. I heard the lock snap and hid behind a stack of crates, watching in terror as 2 men in masks grabbed boxes and ran. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it would burst. I managed to save one folder before they finished their sweep. I didn't get a look at their faces, but I knew who had sent them. Grant was frantic now. He was burning the evidence, trying to bury the truth before I could finish the work the investigator started. I walked out of the unit into the cool night air, clutching the single folder to my chest, realizing that I had just become a fugitive in my own life. For the first time, Grant stopped attacking me and started demanding to know what I found. He called me repeatedly, his voice dripping with false concern. His desperation felt completely out of character. The man who always controlled every room suddenly looked afraid when I saw him at a chance encounter in the grocery store. He tried to corner me in the parking lot, his face twisted in a way I had never seen. He wasn't the powerful patriarch, he was a cornered animal. He asked if I had seen the files from the storage unit. His eyes darted around, looking for hidden cameras or witnesses. I realized that my survival depended on acting like I knew less than I did. I stared him down, keeping my expression neutral, and told him I had no idea what he was talking about. He didn't believe me, but he couldn't prove anything. The power dynamic had shifted. He was now the one losing sleep, while I was the one who held the remaining key to his secrets. The fear was finally working in my favor. Among the surviving photographs, I discovered repeated images of the same woman taken over nearly 20 years. She appeared alongside Grant at vacations, restaurants, and private events. Yet nobody in the Hart family knew who she is. I sat on my floor, spreading the pictures out like a mosaic. She was beautiful, with long hair and a smile that seemed to light up the frame. In every photo, Grant looked relaxed, a side of him I had never seen at home. He wasn't the stern father. He looked happy. I felt a surge of confusion. Who is she? Why were there so many pictures kept in a secret unit? The dates on the back of the photos span nearly 2 decades, meaning this wasn't just a brief affair. It was a lifestyle. It was a secret life, documented in the shadows, far away from the prying eyes of his family. I was looking at a man who had been playing 2 sides of a coin for longer than Mason had been alive. The tragedy of it hit me harder than the anger. This woman, whoever she was, had been a secret for 20 years. Mason finally stopped defending his father and joins my search. Together we uncover evidence that Grant paid this mystery woman hundreds of thousands of dollars over the years. We followed the money trail through a series of offshore accounts that were nearly impossible to trace. Mason was devastated. He looked at the bank statements, his hands trembling as he realized where his father's money had actually gone. It wasn't for business or charity, it was hush money, lifestyle support, and secrecy. Every dollar spent on this woman was a dollar stolen from his family's integrity. We sat in silence, the weight of the betrayal settling over us like a shroud. Mason wasn't just losing a father, he was losing his entire understanding of his childhood. He realized that the luxury he had grown up with was built on a foundation of lies. It was a cruel realization. We weren't just fighting a person anymore, we were fighting a legacy that had been rotting from the inside out for a very, very long time. We discovered the payments were disguised through the Hart Family Foundation, a charity Grant publicly used to build his reputation. The respected philanthropist may have been using donations for something else entirely. It was a masterclass in deception. He had created a public face of generosity to hide a private life of greed. I felt like I had uncovered a crime that stretched across generations. The foundation had been praised in newspapers and at banquets, and all the while, it was being bled dry to maintain Grant's secret family. It made me sick. People had given their hard-earned money to this charity, believing they were helping those in need, when they were actually funding a man's affair and his double life. We documented every transaction, every suspicious transfer. We were becoming experts in his fraud. The anger I felt was no longer just about my wedding, it was for every person who had donated to that foundation, trusting Grant Hart to do the right thing with their gifts. We were determined to make him pay for every cent. While investigating the woman, I discovered social media photos showing her raising a teenage daughter. What shocks me isn't the child. It's how much she looks like Mason. I stared at the screen, the comparison image burning itself into my mind. The girl had Mason's eyes, his chin, even his specific smile. It was unmistakable. I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. It wasn't just a mistress, it was a child. A child that looked exactly like the man I was supposed to marry. The timeline made sense. She was 18, born during a period when Grant claimed to be traveling for business. My breath hitched. It was a secret sibling, a whole other branch of the family tree that existed in total shadow. I looked at the photos of the girl, her face full of life and joy, and wondered if she knew who her father was. Did she know about Mason? Did she know about the life of luxury she was being kept away from? The secrets were getting darker, and the implications were growing more dangerous every single day. An anonymous email arrived containing partial DNA results. They suggested Grant may have fathered another child. My stomach dropped. Suddenly, the mystery woman made sense. I didn't know who sent the email, but it was another piece of the puzzle that confirmed my worst fears. It felt like the universe was throwing information at me, wanting me to see what was hidden beneath the surface. I looked at the DNA report, the technical jargon of markers and percentages becoming clear. It was a direct link. Grant had a secret daughter, and he had been doing everything in his power to ensure no one ever found out.
The reason he hated me wasn't because of my background, it was because my career in financial consulting meant I would eventually look at the books. I was a risk. He needed a daughter-in-law who wouldn't ask questions, someone who would just play the part and stay quiet. He had been so scared of being exposed that he tried to destroy me before I could even say, I do. The truth emerged. Grant maintained a secret relationship for nearly 18 years and fathered a second daughter. He financed their lives while pretending to be a devoted family man. He had kept two worlds apart, managing them with the same calculated precision he used for his business. It was a double existence that must have been incredibly exhausting to maintain. I wondered how he did it, how he looked his wife in the eye every day while knowing he had another child in another town. It was sociopathic. He wasn't just a cheater, he was a man who viewed people as assets to be managed and secrets to be buried. My heart ached for Mason's mother, who had lived a lie for so long, and for the secret daughter, who had been hidden away like a shameful burden. Grant had built a throne of lies, and now it was time for it to collapse. I realized that my wedding was never going to happen as long as this truth stayed in the dark. Reed revealed something even worse. Grant didn't oppose my marriage because he disliked me. He opposed it because I worked as a financial compliance consultant. My profession made me dangerous to his secrets. He knew I had the skills to spot the irregularities in the Foundation's books. He had researched me, dug into my professional background, and realized that if I married Mason, I would inevitably become curious about the family finances. I wasn't just a bride, I was an auditor walking into his den. That was the reason for his extreme reaction. He hadn't just been a grumpy father-in-law, he had been a man protecting his life's work of fraud. I felt a surge of validation. I wasn't crazy. My career was the threat, not my personality. He had tried to stop the wedding because he knew the truth couldn't survive being married to a compliance consultant. I was the one who could see the cracks in his carefully constructed empire. The fear he had shown during the wedding now made perfect sense. A deeper audit revealed millions of dollars missing from the family foundation. Grant may have diverted donor funds to support his hidden life for years. We were finding transactions that dated back to before Mason was even born. He had been using the foundation as his personal piggy bank for decades. It wasn't just a temporary fix, it was a systematic looting of public goodwill. The numbers were staggering. We were looking at a fortune that had been stolen from the community. Every time he gave a speech about charity, he was laughing at the people donating to him. It was a level of corruption that was truly sickening. I thought about all the people who believed in the Hart name. They had been scammed on a massive scale. We were putting together a file that would not only end his reputation but likely land him in prison for a very long time. The case was becoming watertight, a perfect narrative of a man consumed by his own greed. Members of the charity board began asking questions. Grant's carefully built reputation started cracking. People who once admired him now demanded answers. I watched as the local news started reporting on the board's concerns. The cracks were spreading, and soon the whole facade would shatter. Grant was losing control, and it was obvious. He couldn't keep lying to the people who trusted him. We provided the board with the documents we had gathered, giving them the ammunition they needed to force a resignation. It was a slow process, but the momentum was moving against him. I felt a sense of pride watching the community stand up and demand the truth. It wasn't just me anymore, it was everyone who had been fooled by the Hart legacy. We were reclaiming the narrative, stripping away the lies and exposing the man beneath. It was the only way to heal, and it was the only way to ensure that he would never hurt anyone else again. Finally, Reed revealed what was inside the envelope. It contained financial records, photographs, DNA reports, and sworn witness statements. Everything needed to expose Grant completely. I looked at the stack of papers and realized it was the sum of his undoing. It was a lifetime of secrets condensed into a few pounds of paper. Reed told me he had gathered this from dozens of sources, people who had worked for Grant and had been silenced for years. They were all ready to talk now. The envelope was a bomb waiting to go off, and we were finally pulling the pin. I felt a strange sense of peace. The nightmare of the wedding was over, and the time for justice had begun. We were going to make sure that everyone saw exactly what Grant Hart was. There would be no more lies, no more secrets, and no more manipulation. The truth was going to set us all free, regardless of the pain it caused along the way. Cornered, Grant accused Reed of fabricating evidence and publicly blamed me for orchestrating the entire scandal. His attack turned me into the villain overnight. He went on every local news outlet, claiming I was a vengeful woman who couldn't handle his rejection. He painted a picture of a scorned bride out to destroy a family. It was a classic move, the powerful man attacking the woman who threatened him. It was difficult to watch, but I knew it was his final act of desperation. People started calling me, sending me hateful messages online, and I even had to leave my house to avoid the press. It was a dark, confusing time. But then, support began to pour in from unexpected places. People who had known about his past began to speak out, countering his narrative. I realized I wasn't alone. I had the truth, and that was worth more than his expensive PR machine. I stayed silent, waiting for the legal process to do its work. Grant filed a lawsuit against me, Reed, and several board members. For a moment, it looks like his wealth and influence might allow him to escape consequences. He was fighting with everything he had, using his money to drag out the legal process and bury us in paperwork. The court dates were grueling, and the constant threat of his lawyers made me feel like I was constantly looking over my shoulder. He was trying to drain our resources, hoping we would give up and go away. But we had something he didn't, the truth. My lawyer told me to stay the course, that he was just trying to intimidate us. We kept showing up, kept filing our evidence, and kept pressing the case. It was a battle of attrition, and I was determined to be the last one standing. I wouldn't let him buy his way out of the consequences of his actions. I was fighting for my future, and I wouldn't stop until he was held accountable. A former accountant who worked for Grant came forward. She brought decades of records proving the financial fraud. The case against Grant became impossible to deny. She had kept copies of everything, a secret archive that proved the foundation was a front. When she testified, the courtroom went deathly silent. She told them about the secret payments, the hidden bank accounts, and how she had been threatened if she ever spoke up. Her testimony was the missing piece, the final blow to his defense. I watched as Grant's lawyers tried to discredit her, but the evidence was too clear. She was brave, and her testimony shifted everything. The judge finally saw the full picture, and the lawsuit he had filed to destroy us began to collapse around him. I felt like the weight of the world was lifting. The truth was no longer just my secret, it was on the record, in a court of law, where no amount of money could make it disappear. Mason discovered his father used money intended for his college fund and family trust to support the secret family. The betrayal devastated him. He sat in the office, going through the papers, his face pale and unmoving. He had worked so hard, believing his education and his future were secured by his father's generosity, only to realize he had been living on the scraps of what was left after his father's secret life was paid for. It was a betrayal that went to the heart of his identity. He had always believed in his father's sense of duty, but now he saw it for what it was, a sham. I held his hand, offering what little comfort I could, but the damage was done. He had to process the fact that the life he lived was built on a foundation of theft. It changed him, making him more cautious, more guarded, but it also made him more honest. He stopped looking for his father's approval and started looking for his own path. News outlets published the story. The secret daughter, the affair, the missing charity funds, and the years of deception became public knowledge. Grant's image collapsed overnight. It was everywhere. Newspapers, blogs, television reports, the Hart family saga was the lead story. It was an explosive end to his carefully maintained facade. People who had once praised him were now calling for his head. I watched the coverage with a strange detachment. It wasn't the relief I thought it would be, it was just the closing of a chapter. The public reaction was overwhelming, a mixture of shock and anger. It was a cleansing fire, burning away the lies that had defined our lives for so long. The Harts were no longer a family to be admired, they were a family to be pitied, and eventually, forgotten. The truth had finally overtaken the lies, and there was no turning back now. The name Hart would never carry the same weight again. Grant lost his position on multiple boards, faces criminal investigations, and watches former allies abandon him. For the first time, he has no control over the narrative. He was a broken man, stripped of his status and his resources. The court began the process of seizing his assets to repay the stolen funds. He was alone, isolated by the scandal he had created. I saw him once from a distance, walking toward his car, looking smaller than I ever thought possible. The power he had used to terrorize us was gone. He was just a man facing the consequences of his choices. It was a stark conclusion to his reign of terror. He had destroyed his own legacy, piece by piece, and now he was left with nothing but his own choices. It was a lesson in the fragility of power and the inevitability of the truth. He had thought he could control everything, but in the end, he couldn't control even the simplest parts of his own life. 1 year later, Mason and I finally get married in a small lakeside ceremony surrounded by people who genuinely support us. Before the ceremony begins, Reed attends as a guest. As I walk down the aisle, I think back to the envelope that stopped my first wedding. What felt like the worst day of my life turned out to be the day the truth finally came to light. The air was fresh and clear, and the lake sparkled in the afternoon sun. I looked at Mason, who was waiting for me with a look of pure love in his eyes. There were no secrets, no hidden agendas, and no meddling fathers. We were building our life on a solid, honest foundation. I remembered the feeling of the envelope in the chapel, the fear, the confusion, but it was gone now, replaced by the certainty of our future. We had survived the fire, and we had come out on the other side. As I said my vows, I felt the truth wrapping around me like a warm embrace. It was the wedding we deserved, and it was the start of the life we had finally earned.